Hey, what's going on? It's at the letters for Thursday, August 13th. Arden Zwelling, Ben Nicholson Smith. Our producer is Christian Ryan. Our video producer is Mike Tassoni. Thank you so much for their help. As always, Ben. Let's just say this. It's Thursday. We are coming off of that two-game series against the Miami Marlins that the Blue Jays played. And amidst like this cursed year, right, of 2020, in which everything is so grim and demoralizing at all times. It was somewhat of a sign of normalcy, somewhat of a feeling of comfort to see the Toronto Blue Jays participate in what had to be one of the most ridiculous baseball games I think that I have ever seen played. Like, I feel like over the last few seasons, like, I've found a few occasions on which to say that. So, the fact that the Blue Jays are back in games such as that, it's a sign that nature is healing, Ben, and it's a sign that we're getting back to ourselves.
Yeah, it felt oddly normal to see the Blue Jays play such a bizarre game and, of course, lose it. I mean, that's the kind of game that they deserve to lose, but they had to win it. I mean, when you have so many home runs, when you have that kind of a comeback, you need to complete that against a team like the Miami Marlins, right? This year, you don't have that many chances to beat up on teams that aren't good. You got to take advantage of them. And so, really disappointing outcome for the Toronto Blue Jays, I think, on a lot of levels. And in some ways, it was a very different game because they actually scored some runs. But in some ways, you saw some concerning signs that we have seen before, and particularly, I think, on the defense. I mean, that was the most egregious example. But man, they're not a good defensive team right now, and that was the clearest example yet.
You had in that game like 1,000 runs scored, and as you alluded to, I don't know if any of them could be described as particularly earned. You also had walks on walks on walks on both sides. You had ridiculous little league errors. Not only the defense but also dudes running into outs on the base paths, which is something that we have seen. You had a speed skater playing second base. Like, the entire thing was ridiculous throughout. But you're right, the defense has not been there for the Blue Jays. It was not there last night. The base running has not been there for the Blue Jays. And you kind of, they say that like little errors like that and little miscues like that really show up in close games or in like low scoring games. They really show up in that game as well, because the Blue Jays don't make like some very basic fundamental errors and some mistakes that they really ought not to at the major league level. They win that game and they have a series sweep over the Miami Marlins, who, by the way, like, you should beat if you want to go to the playoffs in the year 2020. The Miami Marlins, like, half their team is still on the COVID IL. John Birdie is their two-hole hitter. Justin Schaefer is coming out of their bullpen. Like, Birdie and Schaefer, guys who could not make 89 loss Blue Jays teams, could not crack a 95 loss Blue Jays team when they were in this organization. As I alluded to, they are literally starting Olympic speed skaters on the infield. You have to beat that team if you're the Toronto Blue Jays. You just make too many fundamental errors, you play too sloppy baseball, you end up giving away a game that you really ought to have won, and you can't do that too many times in a 60-game season.
No, you can't. And amazing story, by the way, to have a speed skater and not just an Olympian, but a medalist. I mean, that's incredible. But yeah, the Marlins are a team has been put together off the cuff. I mean, you think about a guy like Logan Forsythe, who almost took AJ Cole deep down the left field line in the opening game of the series. And Forsythe was just on the scrap heap. I mean, this is a guy who didn't have a major league job until the Marlins had this COVID outbreak. And then all of a sudden he's out there almost hitting bombs against the Blue Jays in leverage. So, this is a team that you should beat. Some of this comes down to Nate Pearson, of course. I mean, we'll get to Pearson and his struggles in his third outing of the season, and third outing in the major leagues, of course. But, to me, 15 games into the season, we're at, one quarter of the way through, 25% through this season. And what I'm seeing now, Arden, is a team that doesn't look like a playoff team and doesn't sound like a playoff team. Like, if you're coming off a 5-8 road trip and you're saying that's a good road trip, to me, doesn't sound like a team that believes it's destined for the playoffs. And maybe that's understandable. Maybe that's, probably the most likely outcome for this 2020 season, was that the Blue Jays would end up being in another sort of development year. But it is a little disappointing because there was that potential in a shortened season with expanded playoffs for anything to happen. And right now what we're seeing is kind of more of the same. I mean, it's a better team. It's obviously a better team than it was last year, and they're not going to be at a 95 loss pace, but 6-9, I mean, they deserve that record, really. And I think they've had some close calls, to be sure, and they could have won a lot more games than they have to this point, but it's also not an entirely undeserved record. They should be below 500 the way they're playing.
It's funny how that last little bit changes our perspective about the playoffs because, like 25 minutes before the season started, Rob Manfred was like, oh, hey, 8 teams per league make the playoffs now. We're changing everything. And all of a sudden it became, hey, the Blue Jays should win now. Like they should be in the playoffs now. But if this were a 162 game season with a regular playoff format, a traditional one, I don't think anybody would have picked the Toronto Blue Jays to make the playoffs. And I think everybody would have been much more okay with the developmental season that we are seeing playing out at the major league level right now, with guys like Nate Pearson taking the mound and not having his fastball command and having to figure it out, with guys making outs on the base paths and guys learning new positions and some of the just, developmental things, the minor league things, that game on Wednesday night was very befitting of the ballpark that it was played in. It was a minor league game out there, played by a lot of guys who would probably be in the minor leagues right now during a regular season if COVID wasn't a thing. But all that aside, like, it's funny how it does change expectations, why, just because the playoff format has changed, like, why would you expect the Blue Jays to play any differently, right? Like, of course they're still going to play the same level of baseball and the same caliber of baseball that they would have no matter how many teams make the playoffs. So, like, I don't think that anybody should be, like, surprised by what they are seeing on the field. But I do think that expectations have shifted, and maybe that's just coloring some of the perspective of what we're seeing.
Yeah, it's a good point. Because they're a team that's very young and a team that has a lot to learn. I mean, that's becoming really apparent, is that this is a talented team, but, you watch, for example, Vladdy playing first base, and man, like, he is so far from a finished product there. And it's not just the error, of course, but it's little things like when Danny Jansen wants to pick off a runner at first base, and Vlad's just not there. He's not picking up on that. He's not ready to field that potential pickoff throw. So those things add up. It's impossible. Well, I shouldn't say impossible. It's very difficult to quantify those things. And as a result, we're looking at a team that does allow some unearned runs, that doesn't escape innings, and can sometimes let these situations get away from them. Even with Nate Pearson, right? I mean, Pearson and Vlad, they're cornerstone pieces for this team in the future. And yet neither one of them looked like a polished product in that Wednesday night game against the Marlins. And maybe we shouldn't expect them to look like polished products either. Vlad is learning a new position. Pearson is making his third major league start. But sometimes, and I'm as guilty as anybody, sometimes we trade away with potential. And of course, Pearson's potential is on display when he's throwing 100 miles an hour. But if you're not throwing it over the plate for strikes, if you're not throwing your slider over the plate for strikes, it honestly doesn't matter. And he made the Marlins, like, again, this is not a good offensive team. This is not a good baseball team, objectively speaking, in the context of Major League Baseball. And he made the Marlins look like an offensive juggernaut. Like, Francisco Cervelli is just spitting on his breaking stuff. You've got Matt Joyce having good at-bats, Dickerson having good at-bats. The Marlins aren't a joke. I mean, they're okay, but they're not the Yankees. They're not the Astros. And Pearson made the Marlins look pretty good. And by his own admission afterwards, he said, I was not good. He was obviously very disappointed with the start.
These things can be simultaneously true. The Blue Jays can be playing awful, really bad baseball, but they can also be developing, and they can be building for the future at the same time. And I just think that, if this was a 162 game season, everybody would be saying, yeah, look, they're still young, they're still learning, they're still, getting up to speed. It wouldn't be you're blowing this like huge opportunity. But hey, these things can be simultaneously true. When it comes to Pearson, he just did not have his fastball command against Miami. He didn't have command of anything, really. Like, he just did not have anything working for him. So, you can throw a bunch of pitches with great spin and great velocity, and you can sequence them, however you want. But if you can't put them in the zone, professional hitters at this level are going to recognize that, and they're going to make you work out there, and they're going to make you throw another pitch, another pitch, another pitch, and they're going to force you into the zone, because if you don't come into the zone, you're going to walk in a run like Nate Pearson did. Right now, I think the key for him is kind of balancing, figuring this thing out, right, and like mechanically what's going on, why has he struggled with this command to this point, what little tweaks can he make, what can he do inside session, what like small adjustments can he make, but also not doing too much and not like tinkering like crazy and not overdoing it to a point where you like mess yourself up even further. Like there is really kind of like an interesting balance there. It's gonna be cool for me, just as somebody who's interested in development and interested in, the trajectory of young players, to watch that play out and to kind of see how he learns that on the fly. That's something that typically would be happening away from our eyes in the minor leagues, right? Like in AAA or, at this point in Nate Pearson's career, but we're watching it play out in the majors. So it's going to be kind of cool, for me to watch that. But I think that's the thing for Nate right now. He went through something similar in the Arizona Fall League a couple years back. He had an outing just like this one against Miami where he was just awful. Like he couldn't find the zone, gave up a bunch of runs and, didn't have his command, this, that, and the other. And he was able to figure it out then. So I'm sure he's going to look back on that experience and say, all right, what worked for me then? Like, what was I able to do in order to get myself right again? The difference is now he's doing it in the major leagues, and, his next time out probably going to come against a pretty good team.
Yeah, that's right. And, Pearson very clearly has some really high expectations for himself. And I think Dan Shulman and Buck Martinez on the broadcast have done a really good job of highlighting some of the moments where you can see Pearson's emotions are there, and he's having trouble kind of managing them to some extent. And that's totally understandable, I think, given the stakes and given some of the plays that are made or not made behind him. But I'm thinking of the pop-up that dropped in shallow, I believe it was right field behind Kevin Biggio there. And then Pearson's kind of looking up at the sky, saying, without saying it, he's saying, I wish I had that out. I thought I should have had that out there. And I don't think it's showing up his teammates by any stretch, but it shows that Pearson's really getting swept up in that moment. And if you picture, the best case scenario for Nate Pearson 5 years down the road, if he can become one of those aces that he certainly has the potential to, like a Garrett Cole or a Justin Verlander, then those are moments where he's going to have to compose himself a little bit quicker and then start throwing strikes again and not dancing around the edges of the strike zone. So as you said, Arden, I mean, these are developmental lessons. You would not expect any pitcher, I mean, whoever it is, even on a smaller scale, because Cole and Verlander are Hall of Famers. So let's even say that, it's Mike Clevenger or Shane Bieber or someone who's just an emerging ace, Lucas Giolito. Even those guys have learned those lessons, but they've had a lot of time to learn them too. So again, it's going to take some patience. It's going to take some reps, and Pearson's in the midst of that process right now.
You mentioned, Nate Pearson kind of looking up to the heavens, like what the hell is going on? You kind of see the same thing with Vladimir Guerrero Jr. at the plate right now, and some of the results that he's getting, some of the ground balls and some of the pitches that like he is miss-swinging on, because he is like getting, inner half fastball on, like on, thigh high type of pitch that he would like dominate in the minor leagues, I'm sure, or like, elevated breaking balls that are just hanging up there for him to punish, and he is getting ground ball results on them. And you see that frustration from him at the plate. And I've kind of, I talked about this a couple podcasts ago, like he just the mannerisms and the presence in the batting box right now for Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is so much different than when he was in the minor leagues and, had yet to reach a level that had challenged him. He was so much more confident in the box in the minors and like doing like kind of Juan Soto-ish type of stuff, like, watching pitches like all the way through and, shaking his head when it's a pitch that he knows he should, be laying off and it's just going to fall right outside the strike zone, and it does, right? Like, he did like kind of cool little like, kind of shimmy type of stuff, like just type of like a physical manifestation of like how confident he was in the box. And we're not seeing that right now. We're seeing a guy who is like looks really a lot like he wants to break his bat over his knee, like a guy who looks really frustrated with some of the, ball strike calls that he's been receiving. And look, that's going to be part of it for him, right? Like that adjustment, that mental approach, that's going to be a very, very big part of his development. And we can't say enough, like how young he is, how players his age, if they're coming out of college have like just been drafted, right? Like Austin Martin is in Rochester right now, like that's his trajectory has been a lot different than those players, but it is his second season in the major leagues. And you do have to, hold him to the standard of a big league ball player. And right now he's not getting it done. But I think that type of, mental development is a big thing for him as well, Ben.
Yeah, and the Blue Jays have said this for months and months now that, it's not necessarily a swing issue with Vlad, or it's certainly not purely a swing issue. A lot of this comes down to pitch selection and the way that he works a count. And we have seen him chase in the majors more than he chased in the minors. And this is something the Blue Jays are well aware of. Ross Atkins this week was, very spelling this out pretty clearly that, Vlad Guerrero Jr. right now is not taking quite the same pitches. He is expanding the zone more. He is hitting more balls in the ground. So all of that adds up to a much different strikeout to walk ratio than we would expect from Vladdy. And, you mentioned his kind of mannerisms and what we see from him between the lines, just, facial expressions, the way that he's acting out there on the field. And to me, I've always gotten the sense that Vladdy is someone who wants to have a lot of fun on the diamond. Like when he's at his best, he's someone who wants to be out there just being a gregarious personality, someone who's got, maybe like you said, a little bit of Juan Soto, a little bit of Adrian Beltre, a little bit of David Ortiz, someone who's really enjoying it, someone who's really pretty expressive on the field in a way that, I don't think that Cavan Biggio necessarily wants to do that, even if he's performing at his best, even if he's totally in the flow of his performance and just succeeding and thriving. That's not the vibe that I get from Biggio, but Vladdy, it seems to me, wants to be there. And if he does start hitting the way he can, I think that's what we're going to see from him. And right now he wants to be there, but he's not. And I know he homered last night too. So, I mean, let's not be too hard on the guy, but there's clearly more strides he needs to take.
Yeah. I mean, the profile right now is a guy who still hits the ball really, really hard. He's just hitting it down into the ground. Like you look at the StatCast stuff, and like Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is second on the team in hard hit rate, like second on the team in average exit velocity. Like it's like the ball, he's hitting it really hard. He's just hitting it down to the ground. He's in too many ground balls. He's not fast enough to run any of them out. And he's not walking enough. So it's pretty clear, like the adjustments he needs to make and the tweaks he needs to make. And I understand it's going to be like, frustrating for fans to watch Vladimir Guerrero Jr. like go through that. And like, it must be said, like the Blue Jays have not been good enough to this point. And like, we've seen in some of these close games, like a big Vladimir Guerrero Jr. swing at the right time with a couple of runners on, or a defensive miscue that wasn't made, right? Like a play being made in the field could have really turned the fortunes of this team. Like that's actually how like close they are. Like that's how thin the margin is, that like just a few little like different breaks like that and different things like that occurring could have the Blue Jays with a positive record, like above 500 right now, and could have them being like, yeah, we could, sneak into that 7th or 8th, playoff spot in the American League. But they aren't there right now because those plays haven't been made and because Vladimir Guerrero Jr. hasn't looked good at the plate. And like nobody on the team really has looked good outside of Teoscar Hernandez and Bo Bichette at the plate. Like they had this massive offensive outbreak on Wednesday night, but they're still, second last in baseball in runs scored to the St. Louis Cardinals, who have played 5 games. Right. So, they're still like, way at the bottom of the league and on base percentage and like all like every offensive statistic that you would like to be in the top half of the league. And they are not. They are near the bottom of the league. So they still just have not been good offensively. Will they be better going forward? We'll see. I think it's a lot easier to, do it against kind of like the fountain of 4A pitchers that was like pouring out of the Miami Marlins bullpen on Wednesday. It's probably a lot easier to go deep against them than it will be when, it's the New York Yankees bullpen, or when it's the Tampa Bay Rays who are throwing all kinds of like funky arms at you with crazy release points and deliveries and high velocities. But the Blue Jays will need to be better offensively and defensively if they're going to do anything this season. So it's kind of like, it's, what we're kind of, getting around here is that like, there's these 2 paths here for this season, right? There's a developmental one, which is like what the season was probably going to be coming into it. And, what is still very important as you're trying to kind of turn this thing around and build towards being more competitive in the future. But there's also the very real opportunity that was here for this team to qualify for the postseason in a short season with an expanded playoff field, with some like pretty good pitching to this point. So, those two things can like both be true, and they both are right now. And that, you know, the Blue Jays are learning some developmental lessons, but they are also failing at the major league level.
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, I think that for a lot of us, even if the expectation was, you know, they'll compete, but certainly no guarantees when it comes to the playoffs, my thought was that it would at least take a little while longer before it became clear, or, you know, it started to seem clear that this would be more of a developmental year. You know, 15 games in just feels kind of early for us to be getting to that point where, you know, you say this is kind of what it's looking like, but you can't deny it. I mean, this team at this point, and I know they're only 3 games under 500. You sweep the Rays, you're at 500, you're good to go. You play Baltimore next week, maybe you're even over, right? But that's kind of a best case scenario, and rarely has this team played to a best case scenario result this year. So I'm just not expecting that there is going to be some instant turnaround. I don't think it's a bad thing to have this be a developmental year. But to see this team have those defensive lapses, struggle so much offensively through a quarter of the season, I understand they've been on the road a lot. I understand that it's been a difficult, you know, challenging few weeks for this team, but there have been a lot of missed opportunities. There's a sense for me that a little bit of disappointment for these first 15 games. Not that it's been disaster. I mean, they've avoided COVID. That's great. You know, knock on wood. Honestly, I mean, that is a success. I mean,
Nobody's ended up in the ICU. Yeah, that's
right.
pretty good.
That's honestly, like, that is successful. They've avoided COVID. They've navigated this whole uncertainty around the stadium and built a new, you know, venue for themselves essentially in Buffalo. We've seen some good performances like Nate Pearson in his major league debut, and Hyunjin Ryu, and certainly moments from other guys. But overall, between the lines, a little disappointing, in my opinion.
It ain't going to get any easier, Ben. You look at the schedule right now, like there are not many off days left in the season. We're recording this on an off day here on Thursday, August the 13th. And then between now and the end of the season on September 27th, there are 2 more off days. That's it. like a 6.5 week span. It's crazy. Wow. Blue Jays are about to play 28 games in 27 days, hopping around from like city to city to city, like a ton of travel in there, double headers in there. Like it's gonna be interesting just to see how the depth of this club is tested like over these, coming weeks. Cause look, there's going to be injuries, and there's going to be guys whose, arms are hanging and who aren't able to go. And you're probably going to have to go to, 6-man rotation at some point, and you're going to have that double header in there, which is going to be like just throw a whole hinge into the whole deal, where you need like how many starters are you going to, how many pitchers are you going to need to get through those 14 innings that day, which is like right in the middle of this like insane stretch that the Blue Jays are on. It's not going to get easy, but it's not an easy season for anyone, and while the Blue Jays have been like more hard done by, I'd say, than some of the circumstances this season, just with not having a home ballpark and all the uncertainty, and players who have like been on the road for weeks on end. I mean, every team is going through it to a certain extent, and every team has had these challenges. So it's the thing we've been talking about this entire podcast. Like, it's hard to kind of be like, this is a failure, this is terrible, this is awful, what's happening, but you can't do that. But you also can't be like, well, they're just like mailing in this season and just developing and trying to learn lessons. Like, it's somewhere in the middle. But I guess what I'm saying is I haven't even figured out yet how to like kind of walk that line in between the 2 tracks of this season.
And look, there's still 45 games remaining, so there's still a lot of time. I mean, at least on paper. We'll see what happens with some of those makeup games and, with the rest of everything. But there's still a lot of time for the Jays to change the story of this season. And 15 games, it's significant in this year, and it's significant any year, but there's still a lot of time. And maybe Pearson makes those developmental strides. Maybe Vladdy, takes more than 2 weeks to learn the position of first base. I mean, that's pretty fair. So I'm not ruling anything out. Obviously, 2020 is a very unpredictable year when it comes to baseball and everything else. So certainly there's still time for a lot of possibility here. But when I don't know where these comments landed with you, Arden, but when Charlie Montoyo is talking about an opening road trip of 5-8 as being a good road trip, that is the kind of thing where I'm like, what are the expectations internally? I mean, if you consider that to be a good road trip, to me it's more like a road trip where some good things happened than a good road trip.
Yeah, I agree with you. Let's have the Charlie Montoyo discussion on the other side of the break here because it's a big one that we need
It
to
is.
have. So we'll step away. But when we return, Charlie Montoyo and many other things to do with Toronto Blue Jays here on At the Letters. All right, Ben. Charlie Montoyo. It's been a topic. It's the Toronto Blue Jays manager. Those things are both facts. What have you thought of the performance thus far through 15 games?
Well, I think you can look at it through a couple different lenses, and one is how he presents publicly and what he conveys publicly about the team. Um, so we'll start there. So,
Sure.
as I alluded to before, to me, I think if you're calling a 5-8 road trip a good road trip, it's just missing it a little bit for a team that has a chance to compete, for a team that has a lot of good players. And we're not around the team this year. No one is in the clubhouse. No one is on the field alongside these guys. So it's hard to get a sense of how those comments play in the room. So honestly, I'm guessing here. But if you're a major league player on a team that you think has a chance to win, then I would think you're expecting a bit more from yourself than a 5-8 start. And so I would think that your own expectations are going to be different than that. So that's kind of the first lens. And then the second lens is tactical and how he sets up his lineups, what in-game decisions he makes. And I like that we're at a point that these decisions are starting to matter for Charlie Montoyo and for the Blue Jays. I mean, it's a lot more interesting than if you're in a 95 loss season and nothing really is that significant. But I've found a number of things that I don't really get, to be honest. I mean, batting Teoscar Hernandez 8th would be one of them. That's when he was kind of the only guy hitting. That seemed like a bizarre choice. To me, it seems like you want to load up your best hitters in the lineup and just put them at the top of the order and see what happens. So that was a decision that didn't sit all that well with me. And even, I know it's a small scale, but pinch running with Vlad in the tie game on Wednesday and putting Anthony Alford in at a time you have Randall Grichuk up at the plate. And, if you're going to steal with Alford, that's one thing. But if you're just going to have him stationary at first base, I'm not really sure I see the point there, especially with 2 outs, which that was the game situation at the time. So we're nitpicking here. But to me, I think tactically there's room for improvement. And so overall, I'm looking at, to me, an underwhelming start, but obviously under difficult circumstances for the Blue Jays and for Montoyo. What do you think?
Yeah. No, all managers get nitpicked to death,
Yeah,
right? Because when a team isn't performing and when players aren't coming up with big swings or pitchers aren't executing like big pitches, like it's kind of easy to like look at managerial decisions and be like, oh, that's the reason. Personally, like I think a manager, I don't know that a manager can win or lose you a game. I think they can kind of like move the percentage points like 1 or 2% in like either direction in terms of like win probability. Like you can put your team in a better position to win a game. Ultimately, it's on the players. I agree with you on some of the tactical decisions that we've seen. Like, I like even dating back to last season, it's been some bunts that I just have been like, what are we doing here? Like, let's let these guys swing. Like, there's been, the lineup. Yeah. The batting order is one definitely. But then I also wonder, like, okay, so how, like, is Charlie Montoyo just sit down and look at, the 28 players that he has and then just like start writing them into a lineup card? Like, how many people have input on that? Is, trainers, do they have input on that? Does front office have input on that? Do, analysts and data people like have input on that in terms of swings and, what makes sense analytically? Like, I think they do. And I think that Charlie Montoyo tries his best to be as collaborative as possible and to listen to as many people as possible and to satisfy as many people as possible. So like I know that he has final say on the lineup card, but I think there's a lot of input there, and I think he's managing a lot of those things. So I think that's why sometimes you see some of the weird alignments that you have. I think Teoscar Hernandez definitely should be hitting in the top half of this order at least. I don't know why he would ever be hitting 8th. I would be very interested to like hear the process that led to that. Because like, look, Charlie Montoyo was managed for a long, long, long time. Like he knows how hot Teoscar Hernandez bat was. Like he knows how well this guy's performing. He knows he needs some thump atop of his lineup. Like I promise you that he wasn't thinking like, yeah, let's put my hottest hitter down in the order. Like I think they're like there had to be something else at play there. Like, I just have to give him that benefit of the doubt because he's too smart of a baseball guy. Like, he's been in the game for too long.
I mean,
I don't know. I don't know what it is, Ben, but it had, like, doesn't it kind of like stretch credulity that like that would be purely a decision on like, yeah, let me just like put a really good bat down in eighth, like in the 8 hole in my lineup. Like, isn't that insane?
Yeah.
People who play baseball video games, right? Like, isn't that insane?
Yeah. To me, there's not a easy explanation for that.
There had to be another reason.
But I mean, what he told us, I'm just going to take at face value, which is he wants to spread out the batting order, and he wants to have, you know, some different pockets of the batting order that are, you know, capable of generating some offense. So I'm going to take him at face value there. And to me, that's not a compelling reason, because late in the game, you're having your top of the order come around one last time. You want your best hitters up. So that I'm taking his comments at face value. Yes, other people have influence, but he's ultimately accountable for it. And the decision that the reasoning that he presented wasn't ultimately compelling to me.
Well, and so that's the other lens that you were mentioning. And that's kind of like the forward-facing lens of a manager. And a manager does have to be a forward-facing guy, a spokesperson for the team, somebody who communicates decisions, and somebody who explains what's happening, and like, you know, just a spokesman, essentially. And I think like Charlie Montoyo has always struggled with that side of the job. Like, we talked about this last year. Like, it's something that he didn't get a lot of experience with in the minor leagues. And then it's not like he got kind of like a soft entry point to the majors, like in like, I don't know, like Milwaukee or like St. Pete, where like, you know, you got like maybe 2 guys on the Zoom call after the game, right? He's looking at a Zoom screen of, you know, like 20 of us after games, and we all have a lot of questions for him. So like, it's, you know, it's been a tough adjustment for him. And I don't know if he's ever going to be the best communicator to the media. You know, like, I don't know if he's ever going to really excel at the forward facing side of this job. And if you're winning, it really doesn't matter, right? Like, and if the team is doing well, like, nobody's going to care about your comments. But it's when you're losing that we really hone in on those managerial comments. And I don't know how much of an impact they have in the clubhouse. Like you said, neither of us has been in a clubhouse in a very long time. So like, we have no idea. You would hope the players aren't looking at what Charlie Montoyo is saying to the media. Like, you would hope that they're paying more attention to what he is saying to them. But then that also raises the question of, okay, so if Charlie Montoyo like kind of communicates kind of oddly with us, and like kind of gives us strange reasonings for things, and gives us like these, you know, kind of lines of thought that are kind of difficult to follow. Well, is it also that way when he speaks to players? I don't know, but I'm not sure it's unfair to extrapolate from the way that he communicates with us to the way that he communicates with players as well. And so then you have to wonder if they even are a little bit confused with some of the, you know, decisions that they're getting some of the explanations that they're getting for the decision making.
Yeah, a couple of things there. One kind of more positive for, you know, on behalf of Charlie, and one negative to point out, and one that I don't want to go without mentioning here. So I'll start with the negative here. Jacob Waguespack not on the lineup card, brought into the game. This is last week, as we record this right now. That's, again, a lot of moving there, and circumstances, digital lineup card exchange. Ultimately, though, it's on Charlie Montoyo, and he needs to make sure that the pitchers he wants, the players he wants, are eligible to come into the game. And if it doesn't happen, that's on him. And if the umpires aren't letting him use a pitcher that he wants to use, I think you got to get tossed there. I think, you know, you've got to go old school and get yourself thrown out of that game, because Jacob Waguespack should have been able to pitch. The Blue Jays announced the roster move where he was going to be eligible. They wanted him to pitch, and they couldn't use him. So that's, to me, that reflects poorly on Montoyo and the Blue Jays. Then on a more positive note, though, I do think that in a lot of ways, he's the boss of these guys, right? He's the manager. He's making these decisions, and he's giving them a lot of positive feedback. He is searching for positives, even when, you know, maybe you and me, Arden, aren't going to see them, or maybe the fans aren't going to, you know, savor those positives quite the same way. Montoyo is someone who really does make an effort, and I think genuinely finds positives with his team on a nightly basis, even in the face of adversity. And so I think he deserves credit for that, because baseball can be a grind. Obviously, the season has been a grind for these guys. They're in the face of a lot of challenges on and off the field with their families, with the logistics of a pandemic, with the challenge of trying to excel And Montoyo does a good job of staying positive in the face of all that. So I'll give him credit for that. I don't think that that's something that all 30 managers would be able to do. I do think he's exceptionally positive and genuine in his positivity. At times, though, we have seen some of those tactical things pop up where, whether it's, an in-game decision or just the lineup card, those have to be disappointing from the standpoint of the Toronto Blue Jays.
I think you would prefer that to the alternative where it's like the super negative guy who after every loss is like, yeah, we suck. We're screwed. We're terrible. And I'm just sure there is like kind of a middle ground there. Right. And I think that people tire a bit of the moral victories, right? Like they're on MLB.com trying to like sort the standings by we were in it. But at the same time, Charlie Montoyo is not wrong. The Blue Jays have been in a lot of games this season. He's not wrong that they have been like one swing away or like one miscue not made from winning those games. Like, he's not wrong. I think that, a better tact to take is kind of what he took after the Marlins game on Wednesday night, where he said like, yeah, look, like great signs from our offense. It was good that the guys rallied and they didn't quit, but we also weren't good enough. We were bad defensively and we need to be better if we want to win games. Like, you need to present both sides, right? Like, after demoralizing losses and, after like tough games, you can't just present the positive, optimistic side. Like, I do think you need to present both, but you don't want to be too far in either direction. It's probably a tougher thing than like people appreciate, having to be a manager after the heat of competition, like after like a 4-hour game in which your team lost dispiritingly, and then to go and like get in front of a bunch of like doofuses like you and I, and then have to explain it, and then have all of your like comments parsed, and the people going through with a fine-tooth comb, and like it's not, and like I said, if you're winning, nobody does that stuff. Right. So, it is, you do want to appreciate that it's a bit tough what he's saying, but you said something interesting about the situation in Atlanta with the lineup card snafu. Right. And so that's a situation. It isn't Charlie Montoyo's fault. Like, it does fall on him, but on his lineup card, Jacob Waguespack was on the card. And on Brian Snitker's lineup card, Jacob Waguespack was on the card. And as far as we know, the Blue Jays communicated to MLB that Jacob Waguespack had been activated and that he was on the roster. Like, they had done the digital process and gone through it. As far as we know, everything was done correctly. Somehow it did not end up on the umpire's lineup card. But in that situation, as Charlie Montoyo, like, I can think of a lot of managers that would have been apoplectic, like that would have been losing it. And like, this is like my most old school take. Like, this is my, most antiquated. Like, I even question myself when I like feel these things, right? Because I'm like, what's practical about throwing a fit? Like, what's like pragmatic about, just being demonstrative and like losing it and like stomping your feet and storming around and yelling at people? It's like, you're a middle-aged man. Like, what are you doing? Like, what are we doing? Right? Like, this is ridiculous. But it's not the first time like I've thought that this season during the lineup card thing, or I've thought like, man, Charlie Montoyo needs to try to get run here. Like, Charlie Montoyo needs to go off here. Like, it's not the first time that I've thought like we could use a little bit of fire from Charlie Montoyo. I think back to the game against the Nationals when Rowdy Tellez got thrown out in the 9th or the 10th inning. And to me, it was a pretty quick trigger ejection. Rowdy Tellez was unhappy with the strike zone. It'd been a frustrating night for the Blue Jays. He gets chucked. Charlie comes out, basically grabs Rowdy, brings him back to the dugout, doesn't say much to the umpire, doesn't put up much of a fight for his guy. And then the coaches behind Charlie are putting up more of a fight, to the point that the umpire actually like issues a blanket ejection to the Blue Jays dugout. Like, as we understand it, as Charlie explained it to us after the game, was that the umpire basically said one of you has to go. And the Blue Jays made the decision of who was ejected, and Dante Bichette just like went back to the dugout. You're in a situation right now where an umpire has like just thrown out not only a player from your lineup, but like one coach. Like, that was what he issued
a
the ejection
generic
for.
coach.
The number one coach. So in that moment, like, you have every right as a manager to go to that umpire and say like, what the hell are you doing? You need to have a reason to eject somebody. You need to have a person, a specific reason, a specific stimulus that is making you issue this ejection. Like, this is an abuse of power to just say one of you has to go. Like, you need to identify why you are issuing this ejection. Like, I think Charlie could have lost it in that moment. I promise you, and we should, like, Charlie shouldn't be compared to his predecessor, but I promise you John Gibbons would have been like, steam coming out of his ears, at that point. So that was the other time I thought of it. And then the other night in Buffalo against Miami, the like shoestring tackle at second base of Lourdes Gurriel Jr. Umpire indicates interference, points at him. Lourdes advances to third, didn't do it with haste, ended up being called out. Lourdes thought that the interference like gave him the free base. Turns out, by letter of law, by the rule, the umpires were right. They were, like that Lourdes should have just gone back to second, and it's fine. Like, I think the rule is flawed. Like, I think that like he was prevented from advancing to third, therefore he should be awarded third base. But like, as Dan and Buck like properly pointed out on the broadcast, like the rule was followed, and I'm sure that's what the umpires were explaining to Charlie. But at the same time, like in that moment, if I'm Charlie, I don't just take that and walk back to the dugout. And I don't do that because Lourdes was incensed, because Luis Rivera was livid, because the Blue Jays bench was going nuts. And Charlie just didn't show enough fire in that point, in that moment for me. Like I can identify like these situations here where I think that another manager would have been chucked like 2 to 3 times this season. So like I just think that I've seen situations like that where Charlie has just been like a little too accepting of a loss, a little too passive in those situations. And I just do think, and like I said, it's one of my most like antiquated like opinions, but I really do think that at a certain point your players want to see some fire from you, and they want to know that you're going to go and stand up for them and fight for them. They want to know that you're as upset about what's happening as they all are. And it's not the most practical thing. It's not the most pragmatic thing, but I think it does have an effect, or at the very least, like it prevents the negative effect of your players questioning why you're not doing it.
I agree. I think it may be an old school take. You sound like a little bit like a roving instructor, with 40 years in the game when you're talking like that, but like not in a bad way. I mean, there is some wisdom to that kind of line of thinking there. I think, what does it mean when a manager gets tossed? Like, it means that he has gotten so frustrated with what he's seeing in front of him that he cannot stand to be in this game anymore. He cannot abide by what he's seeing from the umpires, by what he's seeing from the opposing team. He needs to express that. And if that gets him tossed, so be it. And I think that frustration is something that Blue Jays fans have felt. Seemingly, it's something that Blue Jays players have felt. And I believe that Charlie Montoyo has felt that as well, even as he presents a very positive, generally positive outlook around his team. I don't believe that he doesn't feel that frustration. But there's a difference between feeling it and then expressing it, and expressing it in that moment and on the field in front of your players. And I do think that there is a benefit to expressing that. I think that, just picture yourself as a fan watching at home. It's in some way, maybe I'm projecting here completely, but in some ways it is a little bit exciting and kind of satisfying when you see the manager get tossed. And I mean, in the past when Gibby would get tossed, I think players liked it. So I see potential upside, and I see really limited downside. You have, especially in this day and age, there's no shortage of coaches in that dugout who can manage the end of the game. Whether it's Dave Hudgens, most likely Pete Walker, Dante Bichette, you've got a lot of guys who can handle the tactical side of things. And if Charlie's watching the last couple innings in his manager's office, I think that's fine. I see potential upside, very little downside.
Yeah, there is the downside is that you like catch a fine from the league, essentially. Right. But that's about it, really. And I do, it's like Charlie has that in him. Like, you talk to people who worked with him in the minors, like when he was coming up, and they say, yeah, this was like a fiery guy back in the day. Like, this is a dude who would get, like, he would yell at coaches in the dugout, like he would go after umpires. Like, it's been there. We haven't seen that from him in the major leagues. Like, and I do wonder if, like, I just think Charlie's sometimes is trying to satisfy too many different parties, like he's just trying to satisfy too many different people who have input on his lineup decisions, or he's with us, right? Like, he's pretty passive with us, like in he doesn't really push back on any of the, questioning that we give him, or he doesn't really, stand up to anyone in the media even. I mean, like, I just wonder if, like, at a certain point in some of these situations, like, Charlie just needs to have a little bit more piss and vinegar, like, I don't know, like, and maybe that happens and then he ends up getting like criticized for that in the same way, right? Like, and then maybe at that point, like, people like us, they're saying like, what are you doing? Like, you need to focus on the task at hand. Your team's losing, like, keep it on the field. Why aren't you being more positive, this, that, and the other? Like, maybe he's in a no-win situation. I don't know. But what I know is, like, what he's doing, like, right now is inviting a lot of questioning. That's for sure.
It is. And I think with that being said, just because, I get some of these thoughts in my mentions, I'm sure you do too on Twitter, of, hey, are the Jays going to move on? I think that is by no means even remotely on the table. So let's just say that. It's just, it's more so, to me, it's interesting to observe a manager when games matter. What decisions do they make? And that's not something we got to observe a lot of last year. And so just observing it, dissecting it, it's interesting to me to do in a shortened season. And I think we're learning about Charlie Montoyo. And of course, it's his, this is game, 177 for him in his managerial career as a major league manager. That's not a ton. So part of this is he's learning things and learning lessons and adjusting as well. And I think that he deserves the chance to be able to do that.
The thing about the major league level is it will weed you out if you are not up to it, right? As a hitter, as a pitcher, as a manager, as a coach, right? Like, at a certain point, like, if you are not able to adjust and rise to the occasion and figure out how to be effective at this level, they'll find somebody else who can be effective, right? It's not the try league, it's the be effective league. Isn't that what he said? Let's touch on some other, like, smaller things here. Salem Field, first of all, your first impressions of Salem Field dressed up as a big league ballpark.
I think it passes the test for sure. And I mean, let's give the Blue Jays credit. They had a very, very short lead up time to get this done. So I think you look at how it plays on TV, I think it looks pretty good. You look at some of the behind the scenes before and afters, which the Blue Jays have shared with us, and you can see, I mean, a pretty significant improvement in a short period of time. I think for the Jays, it seems like a pretty comfortable spot, and it seems like a good enough place to play their home games. For the visitors, certainly looks like a no-frills setup. I'll put it that way. Looks like a no-frills setup. And
it's like a FEMA shelter.
Yeah, you're not going there expecting the 5-star resort experience, but most teams are going to be there for a handful of games. They'll figure it out. And it has to be understood that this is a pandemic and this is something the Blue Jays had to figure out on the fly. And most importantly, it's safe. I mean, that's the bottom line, for guys to be able to distance from one another, to operate safely. That's really the primary goal, as well as, of course, having the access to facilities and amenities that major league players are used to. So overall, to me, it seems like they did a good job in very, challenging circumstances.
Yeah, I think that space is, like, the biggest impediment here. Like, you watch the broadcast and it's like, oh yeah, there's a highway, like, literally like running along the outfield wall. Like, you look at, and we've both been in that clubhouse in Buffalo, in the home clubhouse with protocols and everything, they could have fit 15 people. And in the visiting clubhouse, they could have fit 10 people. That's why you're seeing the Blue Jays clubhouse is literally the entire, like, service level of, like, the stadium. The visitors are out in, like, a tent in right field because it's just not enough space. You look at why the bullpen mounds are on the field. There wasn't any space to put them anywhere else. So, like, that was, like, the biggest challenge here, is that, like, pandemic baseball just requires a lot of room for people to spread out. When, at Rogers Center, it's a lot easier. 50,000 seat facility, huge footprint there on Bremner, at Salem Field and at, like, pretty much every minor league ballpark, like, you're just not going to have the same amount of space to work with. So I think the Blue Jays found some really creative and interesting ways to, like, use space. And you look at, the gym on the concourse and, where they've kind of set up, like, the hitting cages and how they've laid things out, using that space and, beyond the right field wall for the visitors. Like, I think the visiting team will probably have I would imagine, more space than anywhere they go. Like, we've been in those visiting clubhouses at major league ballparks. Like, they're going to have more space here for sure. They just aren't going to have the same amenities or the same luxuries that they might enjoy. They are still like in a tent. Like, and if there is lightning, by the way, like, the tents are good for like wind and rain, but if there's lightning, the players actually have to evacuate the tents and go up to the suites within like the stadium proper. And even last night, looking at, I forget the name of the pitcher who came out with the injury, but there's like this great shot of this really long walk that he has to take to get back to his clubhouse in right field, like walking through the stands. Like, it's unideal, right? And it's, so I think that, there could be some benefit there for the Blue Jays, and the visitors likely aren't going to be very comfortable, being out there beyond that right field wall. Like, imagine being like Garrett Cole and making $36 million a year and having to cram into this like little shower stall after before and after an outing, like he's like he just got out of the coal mine and is being like hosed down. It's like, it's gonna be an adjustment for the visitors for sure. I think for these, like, look, these Miami Marlins, like, that entire team is just minor leaguers. They're just like, yeah, great. Like, what? Like, yeah. So there's catering in the clubhouse. Amazing. Awesome. Yeah. Like, I get to get out. We take planes to games. Like, great. But I feel like when, the Yankees roll into town, some of the perspectives might be a little different.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, just the image of, Giancarlo Stanton and Aaron Judge and DJ LeMahieu and Garrett Cole, just, okay, there's lightning, guys. We got to pack up our stuff and walk in our pinstripe uniforms up to the concourse level. I mean, let's hope that doesn't happen. It's a tricky situation. I'm sure, for all these guys, wherever they are, whether it's New York or Boston, I mean, they're in makeshift setups for sure. So that part of it won't be new to them. But this is probably going to be on the more no frills end of all those setups.
Yeah, and the one thing is, I think those bullpen mounds are going to come into play at some point. Like, I think it's tough with them out. Like, whether somebody's going to eat it, or like there's going to be a weird, funny bounce, or something's going to happen there. It just seems inevitable. That's probably like the biggest, I think, downside of the situation right now, is just like having those bullpen mounds out there. Like, it's certainly not ideal, but like, there's nowhere else for them to put them. Like, they are using like every square meter of this ballpark. So, all things considered, like, I think they did like a really good job with it. Clearly, like, a pretty massive investment went into it. This was a lot of money and a lot of time, a lot of hours, a lot of resources. So I think the Blue Jays need to be commended for how creative that they were with it, but it is also going to be interesting to watch it play out. Even just the way the ballpark plays. Like, it seems like to this point, like, if you're a right-handed hitter, like, get the ball in the air to left field, man. Like, it seems like there is a breeze that comes off of the lake from the right field foul pole to the left field one, and like, it is going to blow some balls out to right. It's been interesting hearing pretty much all the hitters and pitchers mention that it's a pretty pitcher-friendly environment, but I think that is kind of the one place where it is not, is just like to left field as a right-handed hitter. Like, if Vladimir Guerrero Jr. figures out his swing and starts getting the ball in the air more often, I think he's going to hit some bombs in this ballpark.
Yeah, it really is a pretty big unknown, right? Not having seen games there, so you don't have that kind of subjective, hey, what does this feel like to watch games here? And then even you're looking at the big picture of, is it pitcher friendly? Is it hitter? Does it play days? How does it play on windy days? We really don't know that. And maybe some of these players have played enough games there, but for all of them, these are new surroundings. And in that way, whatever home field advantage you'd get from just being comfortable in your home ballpark, the Jays probably have a lesser advantage on that side compared to a team that has played games upon games in their home stadium.
The last thing is the lighting, which like is not going to be up to the standards of a major league ballpark. Like, it just never is. It's not going to be what the Blue Jays players are accustomed to at Rogers Center or at any of the major league ballparks that they play in. We've already seen when Justin Schaefer was on the mound for the Marlins, like, he could not see the signs, and he got crossed up with Cervelli like a number of times. It's going to be interesting to monitor that and just to monitor. Like we saw Cervelli in the second game of that series had like
Yeah.
neon yellow, fingernail paint on, just to be able to show those signs to the pitcher. It's going to be interesting just to see how the lighting plays in going forward. Last thing I want to talk to you about this week, Ben. It is August 13th. Toronto Blue Jays have played 15 games this season. Is it too early to talk about the trade deadline?
No, it is not too early. I think, it feels bizarre. And even when I was asking Ross Atkins about this week, I kind of prefaced my question by saying, like, this feels kind of weird to be asking you about this. But at the same time, we're a few weeks away. We're less than 3 weeks away. So it's interesting. I asked around this week, a bunch of people kind of what their expectations are for the upcoming trade deadline. And the answer that I heard pretty consistently was that you should expect a relatively quiet deadline for a lot of reasons. I think, first of all, you have a lot of teams right now that are within striking distance of a playoff berth of some kind. So those teams are probably going to be less incentivized to sell and to part with players. That leaves you with a few teams who are out of the playoff mix, and we can pretty safely say a team like the Tigers or the Pirates, I mean, they're not going to be contending this year. Put the Royals in that group as well. But even then, a guy like Chris Archer's injured. Our team's going to want to part with a lot of talent. Like, let's say Matthew Boyd, he's not off to a great start with the Tigers right now, but let's say he recovers, has a great couple weeks. Are you, as a contending team, going to want to trade a lot of long-term assets for a guy who might only make 4 starts for you in September and potentially some playoff starts? I mean, that's a tougher sell than acquiring someone on July 15th, for example. So I think there's that aspect to it. And then there's even the logistical question of how do teams assess prospects, or major leaguers for that matter? Because in a normal season, you have minor league games, scouts can attend those. Major league games, scouts in the weeks leading up to a trade deadline. Arden, we see them in the press box all the time, and you kind of try to identify who they're with. So that's the norm, but that's not happening this year. So there aren't minor league stats to go on. There aren't minor league scouting reports or major league scouting reports, unless it's off of a TV screen like the ones we're watching. So all of that creates this information gap between teams, and they're trying to bridge that. There's some video sharing and some analytics sharing, from what I've been told, going on between teams. So you can kind of get a little bit of insight into someone who's training, say, at the alternate site. But what about the pitcher who's in the A-ball and who's not even at the alternate site? What about the guy who's missed a week and a half because of some elbow soreness, and the team's being a little cagey with that information? I mean, it is a really tough environment to make trades in. And for all those reasons that I mentioned, the people in the game that I'm talking to are not expecting a very busy deadline at the end of this month.
That's an interesting push-pull in the types of information that you share with other teams are so guarded with that stuff. And so I don't know if you're the Blue Jays, you're just sending somebody the Excel spreadsheet. I don't know if they're sharing or would they, you would think some of these alternate sites probably don't even have like Hawkeye installed. They probably don't even have some of the player tracking stuff. So it would be very difficult. I think, another thing is that my belief is that you can only trade players off your 60-man player pool.
That's right.
And I wonder if you could get away with that, or you get around that with like a player to be named later type of deal. Maybe we're just going to have this flurry of like PBTNL deals this year. But how happy would MLB be with that if their clubs are just openly circumventing their rules?
I mean, maybe the rules were put in place with the expectation that loophole would come into use. But yeah, it's interesting. I think, we're going to see some small scale moves. I mean, we're going to see relievers traded, maybe even some starters. I think the Blue Jays, if they fall out of it, it's pretty obvious what they're going to do. I mean, you look at what they've done each of the last 3 years. They've had veteran pitching. They've traded it. And it's pretty apparent if they were to fall. I mean, if they're 3 games under, I don't think they're going to be massive sellers. But if they really fall out of it, it's pretty obvious. You trade AJ Cole. If Ken Giles is healthy, he's in that discussion. Rafael Dolis, Anthony Bass would be in that discussion. Maybe Matt Shoemaker. I mean, those are the guys that, based on previous years, the Blue Jays would be open to dealing. Then it becomes a question of what information can you get on other teams' prospects? Is it worth it? Because, there's some value in just keeping those guys around and, absorbing innings, having that depth. And if you believe, based on the information that other teams are giving you, that it's worth it, and that some prospect is going to come and help this organization in the future, then you make that move.
Well, and what is a club willing to give up for 25 to 30 games of a guy in a
That's right.
season which like nobody can really even be certain if it's going to be completed? Like there are like some interesting factors at play here that could like impact the return that you might expect on a Ken Giles or a Matt Shoemaker bet.
Totally. And I think, you look at some of the types of trades that we might see, they might just be to fill out rosters. I mean, and hopefully, the COVID outbreaks can be non-existent, or, at least very limited. But the reality that we've seen in the last couple of weeks is that teams are going to be dealing with COVID. And if that's the case, some teams might just say, like, we need arms, we need bodies. And then that could lead to some minor trades. But again, I don't think that, we're going to see those types of blockbuster deals that we would normally see this time of year.
So you mentioned you would think that the Tigers would be pretty clear sellers this year. That's a team that's 9-7. That's a team that by Fangraphs playoff odds has a 27.9% chance of making the playoffs.
Wow.
The Toronto Blue Jays are 6-9. All pretty much the inverse of that record. A 24.6% chance of making the playoffs. So a worse odds of making the playoffs per Fangraphs. Fangraphs projects the Blue Jays over the rest of the season to win 26.7 games. They project the Tigers to win 27.1. So by these objective measures, the Tigers have better hopes of success over the rest of the season than the Toronto Blue Jays, based on their performance to date, based on their strength of schedule for the rest of the season. And yet you would say that the Tigers are clear sellers and the Blue Jays not so sure yet.
I would. I think it's all about, where you are in your kind of cycle, and the Tigers pretty clearly are a couple of years behind the Jays at least. So I still think the Tigers are definitely sellers. We'll see if maybe I'll be eating those words on At the Ladders a few weeks from now. Who knows? But yeah, I think, what stands out to me about that comment is that the Jays actually still have a 25% playoff odds. So that's actually not bad. I would have guessed, honestly, it was worse than that right now.
Yeah, Fangraphs has them actually with better odds than the Red Sox. And the Red Sox the Red Sox played more games. They're 6-12, and the Blue Jays are 6-9.
I mean,
so
the Blue Jays at least have a starting rotation, so that's an advantage that the Boston Red Sox do not have.
Like the Red Sox are an interesting seller team.
I could see them
stats that they have.
Yeah,
right?
I could see them.
But for sure. But also, like, they would be dealing in some like pretty large financial figures that would have to be changing hands there, unless they just paid the freight, right? And just to be able to turn some of these players into prospects. I don't, like when I look at the Blue Jays, like, I don't know what they would really look to add. Like, you would think, like, certainly a bat, right? Like, that's, what this like team like is, very clearly the offense has not performed up to expectations. But then, like, okay, whose playing time is that coming at the expense of? If you bring in a bat, right? Because you want Teoscar, Lourdes, Grichuk playing regularly in the outfield. Like, you need Bo and Cavan and Vladimir Guerrero Jr. And like, I don't know, maybe you get a third baseman and you move on from Travis Shaw, but Travis Shaw hasn't been given much of a fair opportunity to show what he can be this year. Right? He's missed so much time, and he's been fine. He's been around, but it's only, I don't know, does he have even like 25 plate appearances? Like, can you really so who are, like, I don't know where the playing time would come from if you brought in a bat like, I guess you could use the DH spot a bit more if you're going to bring in a guy and just kind of rotate him through. But that's also pretty big expectations to put on who you to improve this offense in a big way in such a short period of time. Like, you're not going to have a lot of runway to do that. Would you go get a starting pitcher? I mean, this Blue Jays lousy with starting pitcher. This team's lousy with starting pitching right now. Like, you've got plenty of like interesting internal options. I think you'd rather go to rather than acquiring someone. The bullpen looks great right now. If you like, Ken Giles isn't in it right now, and it hasn't been a huge problem. Like, Anthony Bass has been really good. That obviously the blown save like aside, he's been good outside of that. Jordan Romano's like a revelation. Ryan Baraki has looked great in a high leverage lefty relief role. So I'm not even too sure like where the Blue Jays would be adding to this roster if they weren't dealing away veterans at the trade deadline.
Yeah, if you're talking about the Jays as buyers, which is kind of interesting, I could see them adding a reliever. I mean, there's always room to add a
Sure.
reliever. So that's a pretty easy one, and the price you'd think would be relatively low. So you could see that, or maybe a DH, platoon bat. I don't think that they're necessarily going to go out and trade big future assets, right? That's not their style. And so, and especially this year with all the logistics involved, I wouldn't expect that. But maybe, this year's version of Steve Pearce, a lefty masher, just someone to have as a DH, as a pinch hitter. You got expand rosters for this season. Maybe room to carry a bat like that, and just give Montoyo an extra option or two late in games. But we're talking small scale stuff. At least that's my read. Is platoon bat or reliever. I don't think they're giving up the farm for whoever it is, whoever that top starting pitcher is available in a few weeks.
Don't have to give up anything but money to sign Yasiel Puig.
That's right. He's still out there.
There's your fit.
Yeah, the Jays have not tuned into At the Letters from last week, or else Puig would be a Toronto Blue Jay right now.
I'll just keep banging that drum. He's Ben Nicholson-Smith. He's on Twitter at @BNicholson-Smith. My name's Arden Zwelling. I want to thank Christian Ryan and Mike Tassoni for helping us out with the production of this episode. I want to thank you, as always, for listening. Talk to you next week on At the Letters.